Slide, isn't it? Yeah, it's great. Okay, hi, hope you can all hear me. You can all hear me, and I hope out there they can all hear me. Well, thank you all for coming along or tuning in for a launch of this book. And you should be seeing a slide which has the front cover of the book. And really, there's a story, I suppose, about how the book came about, which really kind of sums it up. And it begins, the Working Clas Movement Library are integral to the existence of this book and much else actually, but to the existence of this book and my research. And it really begins over the road at the University of Salford when I was an undergraduate. And I was a history student, and one lunchtime, there was a Socialist Society, Socialist Worker Student Organisation, I should say, to be specific, had organised a talk about 1926 general strike. And I thought I'd go along, you know, quite interesting. And there was a chap, a man, an elderly man, who'd lived through the strike, who was an adult during the strike. And he spoke, and he said at one point during the address that he'd been, you know, an active socialist already at that time, a member of the Communist Party, and actually, I think just after the First World War, he chaired a meeting with Tom Mann, who the little I knew about Labour history at that time, I did know he'd organised the Dockers in the 1880s. But I was also, I thought I'd read somewhere that Tom Mann had met more than once Marx and Engels. He used to go drinking with Frederick Engels. So there's a man in front of me who knew a man who knew Marx and Engels. And I thought, you know, I've got to go. I'm going to speak to this man. I've got to, this is an extraordinary. I thought this would impress both my girlfriend, or my girlfriend I wanted to be my girlfriend, and the history professor. And it certainly didn't impress my girlfriend. And the history professor was like, you know, he wanted me to impress him. But the name of the man was Eddie Frau, who was the kind of, with his wife Ruth Frau, the founder of this archive, the Working Clas Movement Library. And he was so interested in what I was doing. And at the time I was doing a dissertation on the impact of the Irish immigrant on the British labour movement in the 19th century. And he said, well, you must come to my house, and I've got some materials. Okay. And so I went along to this house in Stretford, and which was extraordinary, really. There was a caravan outside, but the caravan was full of books, and you could see that, really, wall-to-wall books. And then you went in, and it was a house in which Eddie and Ruth had permitted some space for themselves somewhere else, you know. But downstairs, all these banners and everything, and it laid out on this desk were these sort of periodicals and pamphlets and books. And I sat down, and then Eddie came in. He said, look, I've got to go to the shops. I'll be back later. And so I'm alone in this, and this trust, you know, he placed in me. And from then on, I knew I had to take labour history, you know, much more seriously than my course was. And I had to up at that point. And I got very interested, and that was the kind of embryo of this archive. And it was years later that Eddie and Ruth moved into Jubilee House. And there are other sort of connections, because there's a playwright called Mike Harris, and he wrote, and there still is, and he wrote a piece about Bexley Square, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I ended up with a role of Eddie Frau, because I went into, you know, what do you do with a history degree? I know, I'll be an actor. And yeah, I got to play Eddie, really, which is really weird. And then years later, what happened was I did an MA. I did a master's degree on the Communist Party and really the 30s and the 40s, the title of the book. And Eddie, you know, I started to record Eddie, and I was recording people really because, you know, I couldn't make notes and I just wanted to talk. I had no idea that I'd be attempting, and that was in what, the 80s and the early 90s, that I'd have to try and play these recordings, excerpts from them 30 years later here. And Eddie sort of introduced me to other former comrades, and some of whom were still, they weren't former anything really. And so, you know, there they are, Eddie and Ruth. And Eddie was born in Lincolnshire, actually, and he was a key member of the party in this area, and a key member of the engineering union. And he's kind of crucial to this story. And it is a story. This is the story of these people's lives through those decades. And it is drawn from, there's a lot of oral history in the book, because just over 2 years ago, I revisited the cassettes I had in this box. So I interviewed about 20 communists, members of the party in the 30s and the 40s, and then I stuck this box at the back of the wardrobe, and then I started to digitize them, because some of them nobody else had interviewed, and I didn't realize, you know, and I wish I had. I was in my early 20s really when I was doing these interviews, and I didn't have the wisdom really to ask the right questions, I think. And I interviewed Hugh Scanlon, and which I think is a really important interview, not just for this book, but full stop. So there's a kind of narrative really that runs through the spine of the book, which is, you know, the Battle of Bexley Square, 1931, the mass trespass at Kinder Scout, the fight against Mosley's black shirts, which as soon as it ends, Franco's on the march and people go to Spain. And as soon as the Republic is defeated, Hitler's moving in to Poland, and so it's the Second World War in it. And I end really with the Labour government of 1945, and some of the, I call them characters, they're people, but so the cast, which is wide really, because Manchester was important, full stop, in the war effort, full stop in the fight against fascism, and it was important to Mosley, and the fight against the means test, you name it. It's really important, and it's a radical city actually, long before all of this, with, you know, Peterloo, Emily Pankhurst, Free Trade Hall, etc. It has a fantastically long radical tradition, and this is the best city I think, to have a working class movement library, really. So the cast are, you know, the people are, you know, there's Eddie, Alex Armstrong, Joan Orman, Evelyn Taylor, Benny Rothman, Benny Goldman, Henry Suss, Maurice Levine, Ewan McCall, who was Jimmy Miller at the beginning, Bessie Berry, Sam Wilde, Margaret Graddian, Francis Dean, Mick Jenkins, Hugh Scanlon, and others. And, you know, to be honest, when I looked at the lives of many of these people, there could and should be books just on those individuals. So I'm gonna work my way through those kind of major events, really. It's a wide-ranging book, and I do try and drill down, but the publisher, it became longer and longer, and the publisher was starting to talk, is this volume 1 or volume 2, Mike? You know, because I don't know, he didn't anticipate it, and neither did I. Okay, so the Battle of Bexley Square, really. Let's begin at the beginning, as Dylan Thomas, I think it was said. Salford, September 1931. 16-year-old Jimmy Miller is making his way along a main road. Dawn has revealed the gloom of a low sky, a half sky. The shadowed side streets, even the main street, is quiet. The boy recalls when by this time of the morning there was a clatter, a convoy of men spilling into the road, making their way into conversations, hurrying themselves towards another day's work. Not now. Fewer chimneys smoke at this hour. He stops at a corner, peers down the side street, the prowling runt of a dog. The gable end is cleaner than most. The Accrington red brick has lost its colour, but it's not coated with soot like some. From his jacket pocket, he takes a Reckitt's blue laundry square that he hopes his mother won't miss. Then he chalks on the wall with it, letters half his height, all out against the means test, October the 1st. He crosses the road, looks back at his work and half smiles. The boy moves on, scrawling on paving stones and walls along the 1.5 miles to Salford Town Hall. He looks up at the clock, at his bright blue hand. This is where the march will end, if people show up, that is. He's just joined the Young Communist League. There are only 9 in the Salford group, but he believes there'll soon be more. He's been unemployed for months, since he was sacked from a garage for fighting, and the meetings help him get through the week. 16 and passing time. At the weekend, he has the moors. And then there is his true passion. Other lads tease him for it, acting. He's part of a street theatre group, 6 unemployed friends who call themselves the Red Megaphones. They're taking agitprop to the workers, just like in Russia. Turn over the apple cart by taking the mick. Their first performance was from the back of a coal lorry on May Day, sketches and songs. He can sing. His mother and father are Scots and they know songs. His mother is teaching him. His mother. She chars 11 hours a day. 3 of the children she lost in infancy. He gets his fondness for the stage from her, his politics from his father, a blacklisted union man hobbled by asthma. He wonders if anything will come of his daubing, if anything will come of his dream to be an actor, playwright, maybe of making plays to turn the world upside down. But he must wait. For a job, for a girl, for manhood, and that won't show up until he has a job. He walks on towards Liverpool Street to the Labour Exchange, where he will tell the men in the queue about the march. He tells himself something will come along. Something is bound to happen soon. And it does. It really does. This is one of the, I think, as far as I'm aware, it's the only image of what happened on the 1st of October. There's Bexley Square's just down the road. No, that way, that's right. And I've just been involved in a film, an educational film, the schools about this. There's a look with the Mayor of Salford, who's a lovely guy, Paul, and there is a blue plaque on what was Salford Town Hall and is now some apartments. And it says, you know, there's a demonstration here organised by the Labour and Trade Union movement to fight the cause of the unemployed. I think that's not verbatim, but the key thing in that when I looked at it is organised by the Labour and Trade Union movement. It wasn't Salford City Council. It was organised by the National Unemployed Workers Movement, and the Secretary of Salford Unemployed National Workers Movement was Eddie Frow. And it's a key moment, really, in the history of this city. More people turn up. Jimmy Miller's, who becomes Ewan McCall, his daubing is successful. And those cast of people I talked about, Alex Armstrong is there, inexplicably ringing a school bell from beginning to end. And Jimmy Miller becomes Ewan. Ewan McCall talks about it in his autobiography, Journeyman, at the end of his life. And he still wasn't sure why Alex Armstrong was walking around ringing a playtime bell from beginning to end. And so I just contextualize this because one of the things in this book, which I really, really enjoy, is you have to put all of this in a context. And when you see these things mentioned, so I think it was Country Farm, don't sue me if I'm wrong, they did the mass trespass, you know, Kinder Scout, we can all enjoy Kinder. Have you been up on Kinder Scout? I really, when the first time I moved up north, I thought, we've got to go there. You know, all these people fought for the rights of access. And I get up there and I can't see. I can't even seem to get the compass work. And I thought, God almighty, they worked really hard to get up here. But on a clear day, it's very beautiful. The mass trespass, you know, and the International Brigade in Spain, as if these things happened, you know, just people just turned up. People just turned up in Bexley Square. The unemployed were really angry that day. You know, they were organised, and the same people run through this. So the background, of course, is the Wall Street crash, 1929, ushers in this depression. And Britain, before the Wall Street crash, and particularly Manchester, isn't doing that great. It never recovers economically from after the First World War. America, it's lost its textile markets, actually. And American economy is kind of booming, which leads it to this crescendo. And actually, I was reading recently, you know, as you do because of, dare I say, the Queen's funeral, about the history of the Commonwealth. And right at the end of the First World War, 1921, about the British establishment know the Empire's days are numbered. They begin, we better turn this into something a bit friendly, you know, and they begin to form the Commonwealth as early as 1921, Balfour. You know, they're on the money, they're looking ahead. We cannot sustain armies elsewhere overseas. So who most gets to pay for this but the unemployed? And there was a lot of unemployed. 1 in 3 adult males in Salford were unemployed in 1931. And what's introduced is the means test. And you can't, I mean, benefits now, no, not benefits, they're kind of they're means tested, you know, as much else these days. But in those days, it meant someone from a committee coming into your house, really, and looking under the bed and actually seeing if the bed is warm. Did you get up? Did you go looking for work? Single man's benefit was cut by 16%, and you couldn't barely live on 100%. So from 18 shillings to 15 shillings and threepence. And the man who comes to your house are in this army of public assistance committees who scrutinise the finer details of people's meagre assets. And when it's introduced nationally, within no time, 852,000 people, nearly 1 million people, lose their benefits. However, the unemployed, unlike today, I guess, but unlike most of the times, have a political organisation in the National Unemployed Workers Movement. And it meets on Liverpool Street. I think it's a penny a week. Eddie's the secretary, and they contest, you know, cuts in dole or withdrawal of dole. And they also do their own surveys on the kind of conditions that people live in. It's a national movement. Its leader in London is Will Harrington. There he is, fists clenched. In Glasgow, it's Harry McShane, incredible man, Harry McShane, lifelong fighter. And the demonstration in Glasgow, I think it's about the same week or a week later, the crowd, you think they were angry in Salford, they pulled down the railings in a park and charged the police, like something like the ancient Greeks or something. Situation on the streets, you know, when introduction of the means tests was problematic, as they kind of say now on Newsnight or whatever. And in Manchester, because Salford wasn't Manchester. Manchester had its own demonstration the following week. They set hoses on the marchers, fire brigade. And the story from Bessie Berry at the time, who knew, she joins the Hume branch of the CP, and in one of her interviews, which I quote from that in the book, there was a comrade, a member of the party, who was a police officer, and he was so disgusted at it that he kind of takes off his uniform or something and goes in and resigns there and then from the police. I cannot be part of this. And he's blacklisted. You know, he doesn't get a job until late on, sort of, 1939, the outbreak of the Second World War. So there's a particular ward in Salford which is of kind of symbolic importance, called Matthias Ward, and it's surveyed by a housing charity, but it's also visited by Eddie and members. And of the 950 houses in the ward, 129 had to share, inverted commas, a water closet with at least another house. 33 had no sink. 67 had to use a water tap outside in the street. Over half were deemed to be suffering from insufficient light and ventilation. Many of the houses were rat infested. You know, they say there's this thing about Manchester and rats. When I moved up north, it sounds terrible, sort of southern kind of, well, I was probably a soft southerner. I remember nobody ever spoke about rats really as a problem in Watford. We just like, people were still talking about this, and this is a terrible problem in when things weren't maintained at all. One back-to-back house they looked at had a water closet that was shared with 6 other houses. This is a quote from, I think, from Eddie's survey. The tenant has concreted a large part of the cellar. This is still very damp. He also pays 1 shilling a week for disinfectant to put down the drain. The only tap is in the cellar. There's no sink. Wastewater has to be tipped into the street, but the tenant keeps the house well. So the march. What are we doing for time? I think it's watch off. The march is bigger than expected. It really is. They can't fit in to the square. And on the approach to the square down Liverpool Street, they try and run a cordon. Am I okay?
Yeah, I'm just checking it. Everyone can see what we're seeing.
Do you want? I'll let you. No one shouted. Can't hear you. Yeah.
No, they can hear you, and it's just the slides that are not going forward.
Well, I'll just read this passage then, off camera. The crowd was bigger than expected. The daubing by Jimmy Miller and other members of the Red Megaphones had been augmented by whitewash slogans. A Galloway Scot banged a drum as the march made its way west in the direction of Walking alongside Jimmy Miller, ringing a playground bell, was another Red Megaphones performer, Alex Armstrong. Quote, a perfect specimen of early manhood, well muscled with the strength of a young lion. That's Jimmy Miller's words, not mine. Perhaps panicked by the numbers early on during its route, the police threw a cordon across the road, but the demonstrators pressed through. Wolf Gray was at the front. We went through them like a knife through. I remember my head going down as if in a rugby scrum. With the pressure from our comrades behind, we pushed them to one side quite easily, and the police regrouped. We don't have much on this demonstration. I have Eddie, and there's Eddie wrote a pamphlet called Battle of Leicester Square, still available, I think, and Ewan McCall writes about it as well. But the police panic and they regroup, and there's an inevitable conflict because the numbers can't get into the square. I think the square was bigger than actually is today. And then they sent in the police forces. And there is a nice quote actually from from Ewan McCall. The first engagement was fierce, but the police have tasted blood and are now lashing out at anyone in their path. But we are fighting back, and the horses no longer terrify us. Here, a mounted cop is pulled from his horse, and there, a constable is deprived of his baton. And so at this point, which, you know, far be it from me to judge, that was breaking loose, Eddie decides to go to the chief constable and say, I'd like to go into the town hall now and present my 6 demands on behalf of the unemployed of Salford. And for years, when I used to sit, you know, opposite Eddie in the end, talking about, you know, the Nazi-Soviet pact or whatever and stuff like this, and then he would, at some point, he would just run off and then come back down with this box. It's you know, because to a certain point, only he knew what was in here and where it was. But I always remember being distracted somewhat by his nose. There was this scar, ran really from top to bottom, and you know, and I never asked, you know, but it's is a moment where he gets it. He goes up to the chief constable and says, you know, I demand to go into the town hall and read my demands, because the local authority imposed the benefit cuts in those days. It was administered locally, not by, although obviously, you know, they've had a letter from Ramsay MacDonald saying, well, this is what you're going to do. And they do take him into the town hall, but they take him into the cellar and they let loose with truncheons. And he's taken off to hospital. He says in his own words, I was taken into the town hall where 4 policemen let fly with their batons. My nose streamed blood and I had to be taken to Salford Royal Hospital. When I returned to the town hall, Major Godfrey, the chief constable, came in to see what had happened to me. And I was able to tell him exactly what I thought of the brutality of the police and accuse him of having instigated it. So who did they arrest for assault on that particular day? Eddie, obviously. You know, so away it goes. And he defends himself in court and is sentenced to 3 months hard labour in Strangeways. And you don't get a bed if you're not staying longer than 3 months. You sleep on wooden boards. And it took me a while to find out, but it's true. And hard labour was breaking rocks into stones. And Eddie comes out somewhat emaciated, I would imagine, but also a much more determined Bolshevik, really. And so, key individuals. And Eddie is someone I kind of follow right through to the Second World War. This is a key individual who also, I'm not sure Benny was there, but Benny is, he's in the next chapter. And Benny Rothman, who had a long life. What are you looking at? Right, it's okay. Yeah, there he is, very young with a bicycle. I think he was about 14. He's from Cheetham. He cycled to Snowdon, as you do, climbed it and cycled home. And the beginning of a lifelong love affair with the British countryside, actually, which wasn't just a love affair, it was a cause for him. And here he is in the middle as he was an engineer and training an apprentice, and on the right is an anniversary of the mass trespass at Kinder Scout. He was born in 1911 to Romanian parents. He was the middle child of 5 children. His father was a market trader who died in 23, and when Benny was 12, and his mother took up the market trading job. He attended Cheetham, which I'll come on to talk about in a bit, you know, Cheetah, which is a Jewish kind of primary school, I believe, where he learned Hebrew, and then he went to Manchester Central School. But there was a caveat that if your father was, you know, was deceased, you were. It sounds contrary to me, but you left school a year earlier than anyone else because you were given seemed to be given a better start. And I meant to mention there was a man on the edges of that demonstration in Bexley Square making notes on the day. And his name was Walter Greenwood. And the same thing happened to him. His father died and when he was a child. And so he left school. But incredibly, actually, that is his first novel. These are the notes he makes are for this novel that is still a bestseller, really, in many respects today, Love on the Dole. And it ends with a demonstration. And he bases a character on Eddie called Harry Hardcastle. Back to Benny. Anyway, well, Benny, he worked in a garage and was made redundant in 31. And he from his trip to Snowdon, he begins a kind of lifelong thing of rambling, you know, and he's a leading member of what was then the British Workers' Sports Federation, which kind of was like the National Unemployed Workers Movement. It was I don't like to use these kind of Daily Mail type sort of front organisations, but it was a sort of wider united front or popular front group to link arms with, really. Weirdly, I went to see, when I went to interview Benny, I don't know how old he was. He was in his 80s. And we were talking mainly about Spain and Second World War, Metrovics, and you know, and I knew about Kindred and stuff, and we talked about a bit about that at the end. And I'm sitting there, you know, and I'm thinking, I thought I was a revolutionary, right? Because I was doing postgraduate studies. And he said to me, he goes, he says, I've just been out on another trespass up in the Forest of Bowland, because this walk company has bought all this land, you know. And as an anarchist newspaper I read, it's very good. And they covered it. And he was in this kind of another, you know, he was still doing all of this. And it comes about really, there's just him and a few others. They're out for the day and they get turned back by bailiffs up in beyond Edale, and it's beyond Glossop, actually, it's the other end, yeah. And he says, well, you know, and this being Benny, we don't just go home and think that's a shame. And there's a culture about all of these people is you do something about it. You get organised, really. So, oh yeah, during one camp near Glossop in 1932, Benny's rambling group are stopped in their tracks by gamekeepers. In response, they organised a mass trespass on the 24th of April, which attracted hundreds of walkers. Confronted by the gamekeepers in their approach to Kinder Plateau, this time Benny and others pushed their way past, onwards to their objective, where a second group of trespassers from Sheffield met them. Later in the village of Hayfield, 6 of the group are arrested and taken to a local lockup, charged with breach of the peace and unlawful assembly. 4 of the 6 were Jewish. The judge sentencing Benny and 4 others between 2 and 6 months imprisonment. And I think he had hard labour, actually. I think he had hard labour for the first 3 months. Alongside Benny at the forefront of the campaign were Cheetham comrades Maurice Levine and Sol Gadian. And it's at the back of the book because it's on my chapter about Jewish comrades and the impact that Cheetham, the Young Communist League, and particularly young Jews had on the Communist Party in this part of the world. And some of these people, they're on the mass trespass. They're on Alex Armstrong. He's on Battle of Bexley Square. He's on the mass trespass and he volunteers. The Spaniards killed it, the Battle of Jarama. Wolfie Winnick on the trespass. Bexley Square, Spain. Kantrovich. Benny Rothman doesn't go to Spain, but he's an individual I follow through. So here we are, and I'm grateful to, hang on a minute. Yeah.
think it keeps losing the connection to your presentation. Yeah, it keeps going back to that screen. I need it to be showing
Isn't it
that screen.
Isn't it that one?
I think there's two open. That might be the problem. Try that one.
Sit on that. Go to the Kinder thing.
I think it has to be.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. You might have to do it that way.
that's okay. Thank you.
So
So yeah, I don't know what people. You can't read those notes. If you buy the book, you can. You will be able to. But there's Morrison V. Tony, but I'm grateful. This is Alexander. I don't know whether I have always thought that was Benny. People tell me not, and Tony Fox up in Stockton is doing a lot of work on cheating YCL. Jack Coleman, key member. Young woman Lily Klein. Lily Klein. Yeah, we have Lily's granddaughter, right? Daughter, sorry, oh, wonderful. Hillary here. And Lily was a rambler, and I don't know. You tell me why she wasn't there. What do you think?
We never talked about it. It was just that a brother was, two brothers were there.
Yeah.
One of whom was sentenced.
Yeah, and Lily used to go to Ralph.
They used to stay now and have their cottage. They lived in for weekends.
Yeah, in Derbyshire, isn't it?
Around.
And well, you
Both
were,
the men and the women.
Yeah. And she was living in Cheetham, right? Yeah. It was part of the Cheetham YCS. See, I think what is all this about? This rambling is a place and an activity during which relationships, bonds are made between people, and political and otherwise, actually. And I do not think for a minute that if people like Mick Jenkins or Benny Rothman, others, that politics would not be talked about on those. You know, it might not be the only thing talked about, but that would be. And I think that people develop politically, probably, because you do. It's not always when you're reading a copy of whatever or Marx's Labour theory of value. You know, people develop politically in kind of incidental and accidental way. And sorry, wrong for the people.
Yeah.
Well, we take out that if you could, it's not more.
Extreme left. That is not true.
Yeah, I think he's too young.
That who you just point out was my dad.
Is he left?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, what we need to do, because Tony, we've got to do this presentation. This is Tony. I'm trying to get out of it now, but anyway, what's spotted? What?
I think Tony is taking a risk. Yeah.
I know, but
I'm not sure
yeah.
that Monty wrote that is.
Yeah.
But it looks a bit old for Monty.
Judd Coleman, is that Judd Coleman though?
Maybe you could sort it out another time.
Yeah. I think we will do, but the more general point, Mike, is that these things are connected. The mass trespass, the fight against the black shirts, the International Brigade, the same people move through, and whether the kind of annotation is not there, is not correct. It's okay. We need to sort it out. Okay. The black shirts. There's this thing about mostly in the black shirts that, in hindsight, and to some extent at the time, that there's all a bit of a joke, you know, oh, haha, and not terribly English, and it would have never have happened. And so, as it Orwell says, it is doubtful whether a Gilbert and Sullivan heavy dragoon of Mosley's stamp would ever be more than a joke to the majority of the English. And P.G. Wodehouse had his character, didn't he, which ran through a number of his novels, I think. It was called the Roderick Spode. It is funny, actually. The 7th Earl of Sidcup, often known as Spode or Lord Sidcup, who forms this organisation called the Black Shorts. And he's described by Bertie as an amateur dictator, and he leaves it all, sort of packs it all in when he inherits a load of land or something. But they weren't a laughing matter, really, and they were Nazis, and they were very serious about it, and they had support on the streets. They weren't big electorally, but this is Olympia in 1934, so Hitler's been in power, what, 18 months, really. And the discriminatory legislation implemented against Jewish people, even people who've just had one Jewish grandparent in Germany, was widely reported. People who had very little links to Judaism were being marched off to camps and their property seized, etc. Mostly, though, let's look at this thing about that unity. I saw an interview with Mosley in the 60s or something. It was Ludovic Kennedy, somebody like that. And he's allowed to sort of say on this interview, oh, no, we weren't anti-Semitic at all. I don't know where they got this from. We were always accused of that. In 1936, when he had his second marriage to Diana Mitford, who was part of this Guinness dynasty, it took place in the home of Goebbels, with Hitler as guest of honor. We weren't really anti-Semitic, just sort of get married in Berlin or something. And the Mitford sisters, who he ran, and this unity, were from a British aristocrat family and regular visitors with Mosley to Germany in the 30s. Unity, who is a particularly strong supporter of Nazism, according to her friend, so she thought, Rosemary Mackindoe, kept a diary of those years. And when they were in Berlin in 1934 and Jews were being forced to clean the streets, Unity would shout, "Jolly good, serves them right. We should go over them, cheer and applaud it." A dinner party repartee included to guests, if anybody does anything bad, we'll send them to Dachau. Right. She was part of Hitler's inner circle, actually. This is Mosley's sister-in-law. And she would she was so fanatical that we know that the CP would go into Bellevue and try and, disrupt Mosley meetings. Unity Mitford fearlessly put on a black shirt uniform and walked into Communist Party meetings in the East End to try to disrupt them. She's really on the edge of she was obsessed, sorry? Yeah. She was obsessed with Hitler, and particularly sort of kind of fell in love with him after 1933 in Nuremberg. And there was a theory out there, it's not that credible, that she gave birth to a child with Hitler. But I'm told by Angus Calder and others who've written about it that there's not much in it. But Hitler, Mosley, as it were, as you see, he makes a journey. And at the time of Battle of Bexley Square, he's a Fabian. And the Fabians are this The Fabian they're called as such because they're dedicated to advancing socialism as slowly as possible. And they took their name from a Roman general, Fabius Gergus, who, I was going to say, he engaged the Carthaginian general Hannibal, actually avoided doing it and sort of attacked his supply lines, you know. And so H.G. Wells, I think Bernard Shaw, Fabian. But when he forms the BUF, it grows really quickly. And he wins a mass transport. By October of 32, there's 50,000 black shirts in Britain. By today's demographics, it's near 100,000. They grow very quickly. Manchester is important to Oswald Mosley because he's part of the aristocracy himself, and he's a baronet of Ancoats. Now, there's no disrespect to Ancoats. I didn't know that you could be a baronet of Ancoats. And you know what I mean? If I was, I don't know if P.G. Woodhouse, he should have thought of that really, because it's not the same as Chalfont St Giles in Buckinghamshire. But anyway, he was really important to the family. There was a Mosley Street, and he was independently wealthy, and he sunk all of it really into the BUF. In 1931, what he does is in light of the Depression, he's actually quite enamored initially of Mussolini, and he writes this memorandum. It's not Mein Kampf, it's a memorandum that basically says, look, I'll take care of things, really. Because he advocates bypassing Parliament, setting up an inner sanctum, a cabinet run by him, and a sort of state capitalism of nationalising everything. And what's his face? MacDonald dismisses it. He's sacked from his ministerial job. He then pursues it in the Labour Party conference of, and a number of people are taken up by it. John Strachey, who was a Marxist, was taken up by it, and other people. Now, the TP have already defined Mosley as an English Hitler before the Black Shirts are formed. And Benny Rothman, he forms this thing called the New Party with one of the, and Cynthia, Mitford is on the rostrum. Mosley's not there, but two of his henchmen are. And Benny takes a group of ramblers to the Free Trade Hall to break this meeting up. And it's not even the Black Shirts. But I think there's a kind of which they see, they know that this is where it's going. So I'll read it. We were out rambling that day, and a group of us went down to the Free Trade Hall. I'd come off the moors in my rambling boots. Lady Cynthia Mosley was speaking on the same platform as John Strachey, and we really heckled the buggers because some of the statements they were making, because Strachey was talking like he was a socialist, and we heckled them until they were driven off the platform. For the first time ever, there was police interference. As soon as the meeting was over, the police rushed in to arrest one or two people. They made a dive for me and failed. The unfortunate police inspector fell over. Which is, I remember him saying that with a smile on his face. But he then, it's weird actually, because Strachey, when the BUF forms, joins an anti-fascist meeting, anti-fascist front. And Benny is speaking in the same venue, right, but this time he's on the rostrum. And Strachey, who's with the New Party, is next to him. And Benny told me this, and it's really interesting. He says, Strachey says to him, haven't I seen you before? And he goes, yeah, you were up here with Mosley. And actually, Strachey tries, he's the kind of guy, was he an MP in Birmingham, Jeff? He was quite big politically initially in the Labour Party, and he has a nervous breakdown over it. Really. He tries to join he tries everything to atone for his support for Mosley, because he drew people in, you know, really from the left and the right. So here we are he opens a HQ in Manchester on the edge of Cheetham, in Northumberland Road. Street. I knew it was an avenue. Northumberland Street. And I don't know what he thinks. I mean, Cheetham is the Jewish area. It's densely populated, working class, mainly Jewish quarter near Manchester city centre. People working in sweaty trades, pressers, cabinet makers, cap makers, waterproof garment makers, worked or as market traders. One of the ironies of this was that the Macintosh was made down there, wasn't it? And this was very popular with the black shirts. They liked to wear it. And marching and shouting all these anti-Semitic slogans in Macs, clothing made by Jewish people, which, I don't know, I found it. But I don't know whether he thought the place was going to be a pushover. But Cheetham, and I'm indebted to a PhD by a woman called Ros Lifshin, who's in Liverpool. And she looks at the radicalism and anti-fascism in the Cheetham area. And it's not, I mean, how big is that? What, 1 by 2 mile or something? It's not, it's a couple of mile square. And she has in this appendix the amount, most people like Benny, they come from probably out of the pale for the Russian Empire. Some of them are actually, you know, they've been connected with Bolsheviks and other revolutionary groups. And it is a hive of radical thinking and radical activity. And I've just highlighted a couple of the organizations. And there are different political parties. The ILP, which very few people talk about these days, it did not affiliate. The members of the ILP joined the Communist Party in 1920, but it did not affiliate as a whole. And it was a big organization nationally with around 30,000 members, actually. But if you look, so these, and the other thing is that she mentions is the street meetings and the places where they took part. And it was, I suppose, where people earned their spurs. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but it was not. And street meetings across Manchester this particular time, because we just think of, where is it, Speaker's Corner, but there was equivalents of that in Stevenson Square, in that park in Rusholme, what's it called? Flatfields, yeah. And elsewhere in Manchester. And it was not uncommon for people on street corners. And it was a key place for people to learn to speak publicly and to intervene. She talks about the Bolshevik house of the Jenkins family on Julius Street. And there's Mick Jenkins, who becomes, well, becomes a district organizer, I think, for the party various times, and a key member of the AEU at Ferry Engineering. Yeah, he becomes a convener there. But he runs classes in the Challenge Club and elsewhere, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the British Socialist, the BSP is the British Socialist Party, which goes back to the early 20th century, isn't it?
Yeah. I noticed you've got Gabriel Crowley.
Yeah.
Workers.
You're going to tell me that's from
1918 to 48.
No, that's not 1918. That's 48 Cheetham Hill Road.
Oh, sorry.
This I've lifted from, and I'd say, you know, courtesy to the appendix, it's Ros Lifshin's PhD, and I had spoken to Ros and say, you know, you've got to make a book here. The Challenge Club becomes a key kind of location in all of this, and it is. I don't know, there we are, if this is it, but this is Herbert Street now, or this is the last time Google took a photograph, and that is a workshop. And, but Herbert Street is a sort of very small dead end. And the Challenge Club is a place where the young people would get together. There was boxing, there was a band that Ralph Kantrovich played in with his brother. There were lessons. It was a comedy YCL club, really. I'm sorry. Also, you know, when you're doing a meeting for people on Zoom as well, that you can assume a certain level of knowledge, or you end up talking over. Young Communist League is the YCL, and I have it. So people would say, well, they said to me, "Oh no, I wasn't in the party. I was in the YCL. I wasn't in the party proper." And I kind of thought it was like, I don't know, the Scouts or something. Before, did you automatically progress? And I don't know. People seem to be in the YCL into their 20s, and they had a paper.
Yeah, you could have been in the YCL in 1930. Sorry.
Until you were 30 years of age.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, thanks for clearing that up. But I think the Challenge Club was largely a YCL city institution. And from there, they organised really opposition to the black shirts. And the black shirts would march through the streets, and there were swastikas drawn, and they would sing, you know, the Yids, we're going to get rid of the Yids. They weren't messing around. Yeah, sure, Oswald Mosley was more than anything. It was a Mosleyite. Do you know what I mean? But he buyed in big time to European anti-Semitism. And this is a photograph of Lily Klein, and which I think you sent me. Yeah, it's definitely Lily Klein. And there was a particular case. They did march through. Benny would say to me, he said to me, no, they never got through, but they did march into the area, from what other sources have said. And her father was shouting, apparently, the approaching black shirts, and he's arrested, and she jumps on the police officer's back, and she gets arrested and fined 5 shillings. And they would sell their newspaper outside the cinema. But the Cheetham, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike, but the Cheetham Challenge Club also had a cinema of its own, or a place where it showed films that was separate from the cinema. Well, yeah.
Well, in terms of they have their thing, not in the Challenge Club in Herbert, but over Connery's Garry, the corner of Cheetham Hill.
That was the gym.
Yeah,
Right.
and that was the best equipped gym in North Manchester. And when the ballet dancing, male ballet dancing, came to Manchester, that's where they trained. And the interesting thing was the effect that they had on Jewish YCL, because it was, they had the reservations about gay people, quite a lot about, until we let these go. And they started training together, and they realized, they were lads just like them, tough lads, and some of them came out on anti-fascist demonstrations as well.
Well, the idea of the Challenge Club, one of the ideas, as I understand it, was like the National Unemployed Workers Movement, like British Workers' Sports Fund, it was to draw people in, to draw. So let's as a community, this is as a community oppose them walking through this area. And I have a quote actually from Mike, which, because I recorded an interview with you, didn't I? People like Benny and my dad were leading anti-fascists. These were people who wouldn't back off. The fascists got thoroughly beaten in the heart of the Jewish community. It didn't work out for them on Northumberland Street. It didn't work out for them. And of course, there were huge meetings at Bellevue, King's Hall, and elsewhere. And people from Cheetham went to those meetings to take them on. And the decline of the black shirts is fairly rapid, actually. But I really wanted to make the point in the book, because all the talk is Cable Street. Yes, and rightly so. You know, I mean, it's a huge thing. And I've read Phil Peratin's book, which is terrific, about Our Flag Stays Red, his memoir. But again, it's a Jewish area in Stepney that takes them on. But it's you know, there's the big moments like Cable Street. But I think when he writes in his memoir about it, it's not just that. That's a culmination. It goes on for a couple of years, as it does in Cheetham. Now, I'm going to have to, and here we are. Please don't go on about this. Is a photograph of the challenge. We put a date on this because we closed in on this newspaper. The challenge was a YCL, Young Communist League newspaper. We closed in, and then Lindsay, from the archive here, pinned it down to the week when this was taken. And actually, this chap in the map, is that, who's that? Is it like? That's Nightster. That is Benny Hoffman. I think it is.
That's my mum on the front row.
Lily?
No, the other one.
No. Bella.
The other one's Bella.
Right, and there is controversy around whether or not this is Sam
I
Wild.
think so.
Hillary doesn't think so. I'm not going to get involved. But, and there's Joe Coleman again. Anyway, no sooner does this come to pass. 73. And I kind of, you know, the fascism is moving fast elsewhere. The black shirts were all defeated by the end of 1936, but for young communists in Manchester and elsewhere, the threat of fascism continued, intensified on that arid square, that tableland scored by rivers. That's W.H. Auden, by the way. It had to be fought there as well. It seems extraordinary impulse to make one's way into another nation's war, fought in another language. But having spent the last 4 years of your youth exchanging blows with anti-Semitic fascists on your own streets, and possessing a faith in the destiny of working people of all countries, when the call came from your party, the question was asked as a matter of casual conversation in the Challenge Club, in the room above the barber's shop, after a meeting, in sweated workshops, in the queue at the Labour Exchange. Are you going to Spain? And they did. And this is, again, this is an appendix from the back of Roz's PhD. She written a while ago, I must say, but, and Tony, again, Tony who annotated those slides, a lot of people from Cheetham went. Jews went to fight in Spain for the International Brigade disproportionately from most countries, really, in America also, and certainly from Britain. And that meant in Manchester, a lot from Cheetham, and a lot didn't come back. And I remember asking Benny Goldman, why, you know, I was sort of in my early 20s, and people, there's a tendency to romanticize about Spain and stuff like that. And I don't ever think I did. I had this kind of, because I'd seen him speak at the Mechanics Institute, and I just went up and said, I want to interview for this, just for some research I'm doing. And here we are. Let's see if we can get this audio working. So you were, I mean, it was, I guess it wasn't a big surprise that you went then.
No, no. You see, in Britain at the time, the fascist movement was making very rapid headway. Because Oswald Mosley was organising his demonstrations in the major cities of the country, Manchester included. You had leading socialites following the fascist movement and promoting it.
The Daily Mail came out.
The Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere with the Daily Mail. Also, of course, whilst he did it in a backhanded manner, the king, when he
Edward, the abdicated one.
When he abdicated, he went over to, I don't know whether you've read The Prince of Fools, the book. He also was extremely fascist-minded. Unity Mitford and the Astor family also was very fascist-minded. And yes, we went on anti-fascist demonstrations. We held our own anti-fascist meetings. But I felt at the time that it was inadequate. What we were doing was had no real meaning, and that the struggle was a struggle in Spain.
That was the centre of it, really, wasn't it, at the time?
That was the acid test of whether fascism was going to become a far stronger force or whether it could be defeated.
Yeah, I mean, numbers are always challenged, but the proportion from great amount. So it's estimated that 20% of all IB fighters were Jewish. The Jewish population in Britain at that time was less than 1%, but around 350 of the 2,500 that went were Jewish. It was about 14% of the British battalion. And numbers are argued about, but about 130 people went from Manchester, and at least 20 of them were Jewish. And Cheatham Communist Party, the same people that do the mass trespass, etc., etc. Go. And I talked to Ros about this, because Ros is Jewish, and because there's two schools of thought, you know. There's some in the Jewish community say, well, it's about Judaism, it's a theological connection between that and communism. And then Ros didn't think so. And then Giles Tremlett's written a book recently which looked at all the international brigades from the 53 different countries. You know, it's a huge book. And I was looking at that, and he said, Tremlett identifies an underlying historical experience. Their experience of historical bigotry and forthright anti-Semitism and fascism meant that the knowledge of oppression was greater than that of other working class people who travelled with them, and it had deeper roots. It's a really interesting subject. It's made me very interested in Jewish community in this city and Judaism in general. And I'm just gonna move along, because I think.
So you were, I mean, it was.
Went to Spain. I had no passport. The ports of Spain were all blockaded by the warships of Britain and France.
So what time? When was this? Was this 1937?
That was early January 37.
Right.
And when I went along to see Mick Jenkins at Communist Party headquarters, I understood that this was the only route possible to get into Spain. Mm-hmm. I wasn't aware of how it was possible to get into Spain. And I explained to you that he sent me home for a week.
To think about it?
Yes, to give the matter careful consideration. And then I came back the following week, and I said that I was still of the same opinion, that I wanted to go to Spain. And then he organised it. I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell my friends. I had it to myself all week. And then I went to Spain, and then about 2 weeks later I wrote a letter home.
It's kind of, I mean, we were talking about, you know, interviewing Sam Last family here, who's current commander, and I didn't, it's not here on the audio, but the next question I asked him, I goes, because he finished work, I said, he said, couldn't help but think, he says, what were you wearing? I was just, and he responded, and like, good question, because he left work, Salford, at 5 o'clock in his jacket, trousers, belt, you know, and then he goes off to Paris, and he has to walk across the Pyrenees. And that was, and Maurice Levine the same. Nobody is kitted up from an outdoor pursuit shop. And in a story about crossing the Pyrenees, there's a party of them, and he can't. And the other thing about Benny, which I found comical, and we both did, is he complained that nobody spoke English. Right, all the time. It's I don't know what they're talking about. They were speaking in some goddamn. It's called French. They were speaking in that probably, right. And what he expected, and he got wounded. He couldn't make himself understood. And it occurred to him that they were walking across the Pyrenees. They was going to have to do that, and the 4 Americans with them died. And I was absolutely like, what? He goes, well, look, it's a war. People die now. He says to me, it's a disaster, you know, but I'm going off to war, you know, and people, we just left them and they perished. They couldn't go any further. They collapsed. And apparently the guy just shrugged his shoulders because that was what happened.
It went to Spain.
This is 2 photographs of Morrison. Morris is, I think it's him. It's quite a striking looking guy. He survived the war, obviously, and lived really towards the end of the century, I think, too. And I think if you are thinking, even if you're not researching, you should come to this archive and look at material because it's mind-blowing. And the interviews with Maurice Levine, I don't know when they're done. I think they're done, might have been done quite a while after he came back. There's 4 sides, and his memory plays tricks on people. A guy called Wilf Charles said this to me when talking about all of this, and he said, well, my memory says, but I'm telling you now, memory plays tricks on you, hindsight, and you want to justify things. But I think he wrote quite a bit, Morris, and I think there is what I believe is a typed up diary. There's Ralph Kantrovich's diary, and then there's Morris's, which isn't referred to as a diary here. But I went through box after box and I found all this stuff that was written in the present tense, day by day by day, and he typed it up. And then there's pencil notes, and there's a note, it says, can't read my own bloody notes. So somewhere in his family, somewhere is a notebook. On the right, this is Sam Wilde, who went out with a chap called Bert Maskey at the beginning of very early, just before Bernard 37. 2 members of Sam's family here. Extraordinary man, extraordinary story. He's not in the CP. He's not, he may have been involved in some of the anti-fascist work. He's no evidence. I mean, he's in the Navy, actually, and so there is very little time between him being discharged from the Navy and going to Spain. And he goes out with Bert Maskey, who is a Russian emigre, really, incredible guy. And Sam's born in Ardwick in 1908. He leaves school at 14, joins the Navy at 15, and he deserts the Navy whilst he's in South Africa, and he's returned. But in December of 36, he goes out with Bert Maskey, who at the time is courting Sam's elder sister. What's significant about Sam Wilde is that he's probably definitely among the best known of the British battalion members, and he becomes commander of the British battalion. Partly because everyone else gets killed, it's like that. A lot of the fatalities are very, very high. And Sam is wounded, like many others, at about Harama. This blue plaque is it Longside? Yeah, where he lived after that. The woman on the left is Dolores Ibarra. Thank you. La Passionara, the passion flower. And she was a member of the Cortes, the Spanish Parliament, and a member of the CP, and a great speaker. And she coined the phrase, didn't she? No Pastoran, I think. And this is a letter, I found this very moving, actually, that she wrote to Sam at the end of their lives. Dear comrade and friend Sam, it is with profound emotion that I join the so deserved homage given to you by the International Brigade Association. We have not forgotten and will never forget your heroic participation meant to our national revolutionary war and your permanent solidarity to our people. Tender and fraternal hug. So, Sam, the International Brigade Association was set up by leading members who had returned to provide support for veterans because the government wasn't handing out a pension. And they weren't. There is a kind of mystique, obviously, but it comes quite late. People can disagree. It comes quite late, the interest in the International Brigade, really. I mean, they faced unemployment. People didn't want to, the people were suspicious of veterans. If you were committed enough to go and fight, so Sam couldn't get in the British Army. He was told that you can't even be an air raid warden, mate. You've been a leader of a revolutionary army. They didn't want you in the ranks. And here's his friend and comrade, Bert Maskey. I'm going to kind of close it there. And I've got, as last time, I just get to the end of the Spanish Civil War because there's so much to say about these people and these 2 decades. And the thing, I'm just going to summarize now, sorry, Belinda. Why does any of this matter? I wrote that this morning, I thought, why, and for me, I think history, people now look at history and it's kind of very judgmental, well, they were this or they were that, and they don't live up to today's standards about this, that, and the other. And it's not the way to approach history. What would we have done in their shoes in Cheatham? I don't know if I'd have had the courage to go to Spain, but you'd make a stand somewhere. And to some extent with these people, I think they're just ordinary people. I think among them, there are exceptional individuals by any standard. And I don't like the way sometimes because history's complicated as well as complex, and it set me off that blue plaque where I began about Bexley Square, the Labour and Trade Union, and I was looking at stuff today about the Right to Work March and the People's March for a Job, and I met this lad in People's History Museum looking into these, which he thought had been organised by the Labour Party. And I said, no. They actually the Jarrow March, which is, I remember Corbyn talking about all this as well. People, it was part of his Caesar's path. The Labour Party told local Labour parties not to feed the marches because it was organised by Reds, by communists. And I feel sense of gratitude to these people. I've never been a communist, I'm a socialist, but I've never really been in love with the Soviet Union or anything like that. But whether you would disagree with them, what they thought about this, that, and the other, they left a legacy, I think, if we look for it.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was fascinating. And sorry there, but we'll do 2 talks. We can come back and do another one for the 1940s. Thank you, everybody in the room. We would like to spend a little bit of time doing some questions. It's always quite hard when you've got people at home and people here. So anybody who is on Zoom, if you would like to put a question in the chat, please do so now. And I will do my best to divide the time equally between people in the room and the people at home. So to start with, is there anybody in the room who would like to ask a question? If you ask the question and then I'll repeat it so that people on Zoom can hear it as well, because it can be a bit difficult when you're behind the microphone. Do we have any questions?
Well, it's kind of 2. 1, did you meet Morrison being brought to? And 2, do you think the Spanish War was kind of brushed out of history almost by the Second World War, because it came so soon afterwards.
Yeah, no, Morris, I think.
Michael, can I just repeat that to
Yes,
people
of
at
course,
home?
of
Sorry,
course.
so if anybody didn't hear that at home, the question was, did Michael ever meet Maurice Levine, and did the history of the Spanish Civil War almost get overwritten by the Second World War in people's memories, at least, and what's taught, I guess?
I never had the honour of meeting Morris, or Samuel, but I read the letters that went between them actually about Solidarność in Poland and what to make of that. So I feel like I know Morris. Yeah, and very sort of precise about in interviews about his language and so he really, he comes up. He went to Australia actually. He has a pamphlet called From Cheatham to Cordova. Oh right, I think it's just beautiful little pamphlet. And there are some books, there's a book by a Lincolnshire guy by Shallow Grave, Walter Gregory. It's not very big, but I think it's a really beautiful book. What was the second part of your question?
Do you think it was the Spanish?
Oh yeah, did it get eclipsed? Yeah, I mean the knowledge that I was in the Labour Party when I was sort of 16. I was in the Workers' Party involved. It's kind of part of that culture, but it does get kind of simplified, and it's behind the horizon of the Second World War. And I think it's Preston who says, if you think you understand the Spanish Civil War, you don't understand the Spanish Civil War. It's really hard. Spain is a very different country. And there's a lot to learn. I never found, Orwell's book, College Catalonia, doesn't tell us much, actually, because he's not with the IB, he's with this militia. And but he's changed very much by Spain. I think it's really, really important. It does something to people. Arthur Kessler too. But or you begin, because of his experience in Barcelona, he gets the drive. And the People's History Museum have got letters between him and other people. The New Statesman won't take his work because it's associated with what they say is Trotskyism. And something happens to him, and you can see the germination of Animal Farm and 1984 in his thinking. I don't rate Ken Loach's film. It doesn't tell us much. It gets you interested, but again,
for most people. Really.
yeah.
Because still these people who, if you mention things not again more still look blankly.
Yeah.
And within the brief overview. And I'm talking about people my age. I'm younger. I'm certainly not really tackled.
It was a thing. I interviewed Jim Allen at the time of the film landing freedom, the scriptwriter for a Bastard newspaper, and clearly he had this particular line on Spain, which we lost because of the incident. Yeah, the Communist Party lost us that war. But when I was growing up, it was whenever I used to get in whenever I used to get in political arguments with my dad, if he wanted to end the argument, he would say, "Don't tell me. I knew men who went to Spain. Just what you didn't go." Yeah, but I knew people who said, "I'm right." You know what I mean? There was a kind of, if you'd been in Spain, it had a certain gravity about it. The way I think the BBC and the other mainstream media avoid it like the plague. And there's also the British government's the whole thing about non-intervention, and Ribbentrop, Hitler's Foreign Secretary, said the non-intervention committee ought to be called the intervention committee, because every member only is intervening.
Yeah, the question for her. I don't know. There was something being with the neighbor, without it. in the golden youth with income.
I don't know all the details, man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for the benefit of the people on Zoom as well, so that it's a debate about Sam Wilde and when he left the Navy, is that right? I'm a bit deaf
No
as well.
question about him leaving the Navy. My dad always said that he took part in the Golden Museum with Len Wincott.
Okay,
We would explain where Sam got his politics from, but I don't know in light of what Michael said.
Well,
Okay.
I've heard it mentioned on many an occasion, but I don't know the absolute.
right, so maybe that's something that
details around that. But I do know.
people
that
could
his
research.
friendship in meeting Bert Mansky was probably the biggest part of his education. Because Bert Mansky was such an important person, an organizer. He had the barber shop at Marshall.
Yeah, I think he had, yeah, he had 3. I've been in touch with his
Where
grandson.
the gambled them away.
He lost one of them barbershops in Parkway, but it wasn't the one in Cheatham. I looked into this Sam and Invergordon because I thought he was somewhere else when the Invergordon mutiny was taking place. But as you say, the impact of that mutiny. So I think Fred Copeman was involved. He was a battalion commander before Sam was involved in the Invergordon mutiny. He would have been inspired by it, perhaps.
Like you say, maybe there's a bit of confusion in my dad's mind regarding the Fred Copeman.
We have one question on Zoom, so maybe if we finish with that, would that be okay? It's actually about Benny Rothman from Barry. Is there anyone in the room or on Zoom who can confirm that Benny Rothman reached the Kinder Plateau? The reason I ask is that around 7 or 8 years ago, at a talk by Keith Warrener, who appeared to confirm the view of the judge at the Derby Assise that he didn't achieve his intent to reach the summit. Can anybody respond to that?
I think it's pretty well accepted. No,
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure if anybody can hear that on Zoom. So it's pretty generally accepted that they didn't actually reach the plateau. So I don't know if that helps. But if there's anybody who, Barry, if you want to know more, then there's quite a lot of people at the Working Clas Movement Library who either know about it, and we have the Benny Rothman archive as well. So it'd be a good place to start for researching something like that. Thank you to everybody. There's just a few things I wanted to mention. The talks are always free, but obviously if you would like to donate, there's a big fat donate button on our website, because we are a charity and we can only keep on doing what we're doing if we can continue to open so that people know about things like this. We have a few events as well coming up. There's another one on the 2nd of November, a talk by Anne Buran, who's talking about her father, Nixie Buran, and the resistance of the coal miners in the part of Ireland that she came from. And there's another evening event as well on the 24th of November. We're having some music at the library. So please keep an eye open for details of those events on our social media profiles and our website as well. But thank you all very much, and thank you for bearing with us with the technical issues as well. This has been recorded, so if you want to see it, it will be up on our YouTube channel as soon as we've been able to get the subtitles put on there, which takes a little while. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to end the Zoom call. Thank you.